SmartWires is a global grid tech company listed on Nasdaq First North here in Sweden. And we're welcome to Peter Wells, the CEO of SmartWires.
Hi, Matilda. Thank you.
And could you please start by telling us about SmartWires?
Sure. Yeah, we're a US-based company, but we operate globally. We're working in grid enhancement technology space, as you mentioned, Matilda, and really we think of ourselves as an impact business, really focusing on how we can help the grid evolve to release more renewable energy onto the grid and really help with the energy transition. And so really focus on the technology that will move the grid forward. We've seen so much innovation on, I would say, renewable energy generation and also on the demand side and consumption, but the grid's been a little bit static and hasn't evolved and modernized, and that's where we're focusing to really help to change that.
Yes, and you are based in California, where you have your head office. Why did you decide to list on Nasdaq First North?
Yeah, it's a good question. We looked at a few markets, and in the end, we felt that Nasdaq First North in Stockholm was really interesting for us. A few reasons, really. Sweden itself, of course, is a country very active in renewable energy generation and energy transition, really since the 80s, and really been, I think, at the forefront of a lot of moves there. A big exchange from fossil and nuclear towards renewable energy as well. The market itself is small, mid-cap, so the size of business there really fits us well. We also found that the investors, the folks working in that market and buying and selling stock in that market, very much aware and focused on environment and society and governance. And so we felt that ESG space, the mix of investors, the size of the market, the fit for us as a company, really combined very well for us. And with Nasdaq, of course, we have lots of options in the future as well to do different things.
Yes, and now we know that you are a grid company and you are active in the energy transformation, but could you tell us more about your core business and how does your solution differ from other alternative solutions?
Yeah, for sure. So the core of what we do is digital power flow control. We have a device, a technology we call the smart valve. And really what the smart valve is doing is introducing, we call it synthetic impedance or resistance into the grid. When we do that, we're actually able to move power flow around. And so the grid operators can use the smart valve in a digital environment to basically optimize power flow. It's a big deal because if you look at the world today, transmission grids across the world are probably 30 to 50% utilized. There's a lot of capacity that's not being used. So our core business is all about how do we enable transmission system operators to really get more out of their existing assets, which means more renewable energy coming onto the grid. And then once that energy is on the grid, that you can use it more and it doesn't get shut down because of grid congestion issues. We can apply the same technology for other uses to more dynamic issues like grid harmonics and grid forming. Why do we differentiate, or how do we differentiate? It's the digital element, Matilda. It's the fact that we're using silicon and software, power electronics. Very little in the way of that used today, in the way that we're applying it. It's highly patented. And so we've got a pretty strong technology moat, let's say, around that. And the flexibility of the solution, the modularity, how it can be adapted and used in different ways in the future, the speed of deployment, and really then you do the whole cost and value equation. We're typically outperforming competitive legacy solutions by a factor of 4 to 1. So it's really significantly differentiated. And the fact is, it's really quite unique.
And could you explain why is a grid such an important part of the energy transformation puzzle?
Yes, I can. Well, the analogy I like to use is sort of like you're rewiring the grid in some ways. And why do you need to do that? You need to do that because when we phase away from fossil and nuclear, we're changing where energy is being generated. So there was large scale centralized power generation, often quite close to the demand source as well. And when you shut those coal plants down and nuclear plants down and you go to renewable, those assets are often in really different places. And so when you think about the physical setup of the grid, you've changed the highways. It's a little bit like somebody took the heart out of your chest, put it in your left foot, And now the body, your arteries, your veins, your capillaries, they have to rewire to get this flow from a different place to the right place. And that's what's happening with the grid. And so it's essential that we really address this problem, because without that, we're not getting the full utilization of the grid. We're holding back thousands of gigawatts of new renewable coming onto the grid. And often we see renewable assets, solar and wind farms shut down because the operator can't get the power. Even though it's there, they can't get it to the demand source. And at the end of the day, we're all paying for this. Society is paying for this because we're not getting the cleaner and cheaper power to the consumer. And that's a problem we need to change.
Mm. And you are a global company with, as I said, headquarters in California, and you have offices here in Europe as well. Where do
Mhm.
you planning to grow geographically?
Well, it's a global market, so there's grids everywhere, and so we see opportunity everywhere. It's certainly true today. Our core markets and where we're very active, Europe, UK, Australia, South America, actually very innovative and moving quite quickly on grid enhancement technology, Canada as well, and the US. So those are markets we're already in, and most likely, Matilda, will probably expand in those markets first because we already have a presence there and the demand is there. But we see big opportunities across Asia Pacific in general, Africa and other continents like that, where there really will be demand over time. I think for us, we will stay closer to the core markets we have today because that makes sense. There's a lot of demand there. And as those markets sort of evolve and stabilize and that technology becomes, I would say, there's a higher awareness of that capability in other markets, I think we'll naturally transition to those as well.
And you have a big pipeline we're going to talk about in a bit, but could you first describe your typical clients?
Yeah, for the most part, the typical clients today are transmission system operators. So the big utilities that own the grids, and it's their job obviously to get the power to the consumer. Interestingly, though, we see more and more now that independent power producers, developers, and operators of renewable assets that typically may not have been, let's say, actively involved or owning grid, are beginning to step more and more into that space as well. And so we see an increasing interaction with wind farm and solar farm developers and operators as well. But today, mostly TSOs. But I think we're all in this energy transition market, and it's quite fascinating to think how it's going to evolve. And so I think our customer mix will change quite a bit over time.
And your pipeline, I understand it is a qualified pipeline built on
Mm.
long customer relationship. Could you elaborate on that? And also, how is the order backlog developing?
Yeah, happy to do that. So we have what we call a highly qualified pipeline of just over 2 billion. We think that'll move more towards 3 billion by the end of the year and then continue to grow. Why? Because there's a really big inflection point now on grid enhancement in general. We've been around for 10 years investing in developing the technology, so there's a lot of awareness of what we're doing and what we're capable of. To get into that qualified pipeline, there needs to be a few factors in the mix. So it has to be a real project, obviously published by the customer in their capital plans. So therefore, we know it's a real project. It's funded. We know roughly when it's going to be delivered as well. We also need to be at some point of negotiation or within the bidding process, the tender process with the customer. We also will have done modeling to know that the smart valve technology fits very well and is, in our view, advantage versus the competition. So when we line up all those factors as a filter, if you will, it then gets in from prospects, it gets into our qualified pipeline. That will typically convert to backlog. Over a fairly long period, I would say 6 to 8 years would probably be like the furthest out of those projects, but that's a very small percentage. The vast majority of this pipeline, probably 2/3 to 3/4, will be converted to revenue in the next sort of, I would say, 3 to 5 years. So we have very good line of sight to the revenue growth that we're projecting. And we've already gone from 15 million last year to 50 million this year. We expect to be in a range of double that next year. And that kind of trajectory is what we're seeing over the next few years.
And what could we expect the coming 6 months? What are the next events?
Well, it's all about the basics, to be honest. It sounds a bit boring, doesn't it? But we've worked so hard and invested so much to get to this point. With the listing and the raise, a big part of what we want to do is to really take advantage of the opportunity, of course, this inflection point of technology adoption. And it's all about scaling. To scale effectively, we need to invest in the core business, in our people and our process. We want to obviously continue to evolve the product, the technology. We have a strong core business already, but we know the core technology will play well in other elements, other spaces, adjacent markets, if you will. So we'll also continue to look at that and understand that, and probably make sure that we're, let's say, protecting the technology this year in the way that it can be applied in the future as well. So a lot of basics: invest in the core, the people, the processes, and really just get ready to scale from now on, really.
So basics and scale up the closest months. And how about the future? What's your ambitions?
Yeah, I look at it this way. I think our business has the opportunity to be the digital grid technology provider. And to do that, we need to not only deliver well on the core digital power flow control technology we have today, but as I was mentioning, these other adjacent spaces, we need to think about how we evolve and move into those spaces too, into distribution, into these large scale mega projects where we're moving huge amounts of power. We see opportunities obviously geographically in different markets as well. And a big part of what we're looking at is when this installed base of digital control gets onto the grid, how do you really provide more services on top of that installed base to really help to optimize the utilization of the grid? And so we think there's a big opportunity for us to create more of an annuity-based revenue stream. And that's going to be a big part of our focus as well, Matilda, is that the technology, the adjacent markets, but then also the business model of how we take our capability into the market.
Sounds exciting. Thank you very much, Peter Wells.
Matilda, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.